Alright guys, let's talk about Arlong Park. Now, Arlong Park I thought was going to be a super fun arc, and I should have known better because the name sounds really harmless. Yet Arlong Park is one of the most unsettling locations in One Piece precisely because it is the exact opposite of what you would expect. Now, we have talked extensively about duality in the previous arcs, and nowhere is that theme stronger than in Arlong Park. Now, Arlong Park itself is a false paradise. What appears stable is really violent, and what appears peaceful is really just enforced oppression. And Oda really reinforces this inversion, this duality throughout the arc. Now, for example, we have Hachan, who is an octopus fishman. Octopuses are one of the most intelligent species in the natural world. Octopuses have great memory, they can problem solve really well, and they're very adaptable. Yet Hachan displays none of these traits. He underestimates Zoro, he really misjudges danger, he repeatedly fails to assess threats, and I don't think this is a comic coincidence as much as it's a deliberate distortion. Thinking is really unnecessary because obedience is sufficient. And Arlong Park is really full of these dualities. And what would a deep dive mean if I didn't focus on the duality of the name? Now, in Japanese, Arlong's name is written in katakana as Arlong. Now, this is the same phonetic spelling that is used for Aaron in the book of Exodus. Now, Aaron is meant to serve as kind of a mediator, supporting the liberation of the Israelites from slavery. However, when Moses ascends Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments, he is left in charge. And the people fear that Moses is not going to return, and they demand that Aaron provide them with something that can serve as an idol for them. Now, under pressure, Aaron collects their gold and he forges a massive statue for them to worship. And when Moses returns, he is absolutely furious. He destroys the statue, he burns it, he grinds it into powder, and he scatters it into the water, forcing people to drink it as punishment. So why am I bringing this up in reference to Arlong? Well, Arlong really rules Kokoyashi village largely through Momu. Now, Momu is a giant sea cow that terrorizes the villagers so thoroughly that Arlong himself really doesn't need to appear. Authority in this case has been externalized, and control no longer requires presence because Momu has become the visible embodiment of Arlong's power. Now, it could be a coincidence that Aaron's giant statue is a golden calf. Now, across many cultures, cattle symbolize wealth and prosperity. And as I said, the golden calf was literally forged from gold. And likewise, Arlong's oppression is economic. Now, Nami's enslavement is not enforced by chains, but rather her desperate hope of purchasing her village's freedom. It is important to note that the golden calf narrative does exist in multiple traditions, but I want to focus specifically on the contrasting accounts that are found in the Bible and the Quran, because each of these highlight a different failure of authority that I think is deeply relevant to this arc and what kind of villain Arlong really is. Now, in the biblical account, Aaron permits the creation of the calf under pressure of the people. So his failure is really moral. So he chooses order over righteousness. And in the Quran, Aaron does not create the calf, and actually he actively attempts to prevent its worship. However, he really lacks the power to stop it. So his failure is not moral necessarily, but rather structural. So he understands the danger, but he cannot dismantle it. Where Aaron in the Bible falters out of fear, Arlong acts with intention. And where Aaron in the Quran resists but is overruled, Arlong simply designs a system in which resistance is impossible. I think that's what removes the possibility of redemption for Arlong, because every component of Arlong Park exists because Arlong decided that it should. Nothing contradicts his values, and nothing exceeds his authority. Nothing troubles his conscience, and I think that's why Arlong cannot be reformed. There's no moment where he loses his way, because for Arlong, domination is the destination. Momu does not exist because Arlong simply lost control. It exists because Arlong recognizes its efficiency. We discussed Animal Farm in the Baratier arc, but its relevance becomes even deeper here in Arlong Park. In Animal Farm, Napoleon uses dogs to enforce obedience and to silence any dissent. Now, similarly, Momu's presence really instills fear that is strong enough to keep the villagers compliant. And in Animal Farm, the pigs never openly declare themselves as being tyrants. And Arlong is really similar. He does not claim that humans should suffer because of any personal cruelty, but rather he argues that fishmen are just naturally superior. So inequality is framed not as injustice, but rather as biological truth. This really mirrors the pig's logic exactly. So equality is said to exist, but hierarchy is declared natural, which makes resistance irrational. And in Animal Farm, the commandments are gradually altered until the animals doubt their own memories. So over time, this oppression becomes indistinguishable from tradition. And Arlong Park really functions the same way. The villagers have lived so long under his rule that suffering feels normal and inevitable. Now, in Animal Farm, Napoleon eventually withdraws from public view, and he rules through kind of intermediaries and threat. And Arlong operates identically. He does not need to be there with these constant displays of violence. Momu, much like the dogs, function as a reminder rather than a weapon. At the end of Animal Farm, the animals can no longer distinguish pig from human. And this moment I think is critical for understanding Arlong Park, because in Animal Farm, the revolution against humans promised liberation, yet they ended up reproducing the same structures of domination that they were fighting against. And Arlong presents himself as fundamentally different from humans, but as we've seen in previous arcs, Arlong is really acting exactly like all of the other human villains acted. His society mirrors theirs exactly, so really the oppressor changes, but the system does not. This worldview appears in classic literature time and time again. So for example, in the Iliad, kings rule not because they are just, but because they are strong enough to do so. So for instance, Agamemnon became king through violence, force, and manipulation. And just as Agamemnon claims Briseis because his status entitled him to do so, Arlong claims Kokoyasi village because his strength permits it. There's also another parallel to the Odyssey. Now I think the Odyssey is very relevant throughout the entirety of One Piece, but I want to focus specifically on Cyclops. Now Cyclops occupies this coastal cave, and he is pretty much just like Arlong. He hoards resources, he basically devours outsiders, he does not answer to the law. He thinks the law does not apply to him. And Arlong Park is pretty much the same. So humans are not guests, neighbors, or equals. They are trespassers on land that he considers his by right, and he therefore has justification to enact violence against them. And this is why Luffy's destruction of the park is really inevitable. Arlong Park is not simply where oppression occurs, it is what allows oppression to persist. And this returns us once more to the golden calf. Now, as I said before, Moses destroyed this statue by burning it, grinding it into powder, and scattering it into the water. And Arlong Park kind of reverses this symbolism. Now, the calf in this story cannot burn. It is a sea cow. It is protected by water itself. So fire has no power here. And likewise, the fishmen dominate because water cannot save the villagers. In fact, water is what traps them. And this environmental tyranny connects to another interpretation of Arlong's name. Now, Arlong can also be read as evil dragon. Now, in the Chinese version of One Piece, they use these characters, which means evil dragons. Now, when we think of an evil dragon, we think of one that really hoards wealth, demands sacrifice and payment, terrorizes people, and Arlong really fits this archetype precisely. And it's very interesting that in Japanese traditions, dragons are associated with the water. In mythology, the dragon is considered the apex predator, and in the sea, one of the dominant predators is a shark. So seen through this lens, Arlong is not merely a fishman pirate. He is a dragon. He is an embodiment of power without restraint. He is domination without justice, and he is strength without morality. So this brings us back to the central question of the arc. What does power become when it exists without ethics? Arlong is not defeated because he is strong or weak. He is defeated because his world is built on the lie that oppression is natural. And once that lie is shattered, the park itself cannot stand. Because at the end of the day, oppression does not require monsters, only imbalance exploited where ethics does not exist. So let me know in the comments what you think of this deep dive, and I look forward to making more in the future.